Imagine signing up for a psychology study and within days watching your entire personality collapse under pressure you never thought possible. That is exactly what happened in 1971 inside the basement of Stanford University. What started as a harmless simulation turned into one of the most disturbing transformations ever recorded in human behavior. It began with a simple idea. What happens when good, ordinary people are placed into a bad, oppressive environment? Psychologist Philip Zimbardo recruited 24 healthy college students, no criminal records, no psychological issues, completely normal guys. They were randomly assigned one of two roles, prisoners or guards. And that's when everything spiraled. The prisoners were arrested at their homes without warning. Real police, real handcuffs, real mugshots. They were stripped, deloused, and dressed in plain smocks, each with a number. From that moment on, their names were erased. They existed only as #416, #819, #548, and so on. The guards were given khaki uniforms, mirrored sunglasses, and wooden batons. No physical violence, but everything else? Intimidation, humiliation, psychological pressure? Absolutely encouraged. Within 36 hours, the first prisoner had a full emotional breakdown. He screamed, cried, begged to leave. His identity was dissolving right in front of everyone. The guards didn't comfort him, they mocked him. By day 2, the prisoners rebelled, barricading themselves inside their cells. The guards snapped. They blasted fire extinguishers, stripped the prisoners naked, and forced them to do push-ups for hours. Zimbardo watched all of this, and instead of stopping it, he stepped into the role of prison superintendent, completely losing objectivity. By day 5, more prisoners were breaking down, shaking uncontrollably, sobbing, refusing to eat. The guards had transformed too. Ordinary students who just days earlier were joking during orientation, now performing sadistic, psychological torture with chilling enthusiasm. One guard later said, "I thought I had lost my humanity. I became something I didn't recognize." The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks. It was terminated after 6 days. Not because Zimbardo realized it was unethical, but because a graduate student walked in, saw what was happening, and said, "How can you allow this? These are people, not subjects." Only then did Zimbardo finally shut it down. The Stanford prison experiment became a landmark in psychology, not because of what it discovered, but because of how catastrophically wrong it went. It revealed a terrifying truth. You don't need bad people to create cruelty. You just need a bad environment. And good people will transform themselves. This remains one of the most controversial, haunting studies ever conducted, and a chilling reminder of how fragile human morality really is.
In the early 1960s, one psychologist asked a terrifying question. How far will an ordinary person go just because an authority tells them to? The answer became one of the most disturbing discoveries in human history. This is the Milgram obedience experiment, a study that revealed a dark, hidden side of human nature. It began in a quiet Yale University lab in 1961. Volunteers believed they were taking part in a harmless study on memory and learning. They were greeted by a man in a crisp lab coat, calm, confident, authoritative, the perfect symbol of trust. Participants were told they would be the teacher. In another room sat the learner, a polite man strapped to an electric chair. His job, memorize word pairs. If he made a mistake, the teacher had to deliver an electric shock. The machine had 30 switches. They started at 15 volts, slight shock. They ended at 450 volts, a switch ominously labeled XX, X. Danger, severe shock. Of course, the learner wasn't actually receiving shocks, but the teacher didn't know that. Every time the learner answered incorrectly, the teacher pushed a switch. The learner began to grunt, then protest, then cry out in agony. At one point he screamed, "Let me out! I have heart problems! I can't take this!" And then silence. But when a horrified teacher begged to stop, the man in the lab coat simply said, "Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. You have no other choice." And here's the part that shook the world. 65% of participants continued all the way to 450 volts. They believed they were delivering a potentially fatal shock, and they kept going. Not because they were cruel, not because they wanted to, but because an authority figure told them to. Their hands shook. They sweated, trembled, stuttered, cried out. Some laughed nervously in pure panic, but almost all of them obeyed. One man pressed the final switch with his face turned away, unable to look at the machine, but he still pressed it. When the truth was revealed that no shocks were real, many participants broke down emotionally. They couldn't believe what they had been capable of. Milgram's conclusion was chilling. Ordinary people can commit extraordinary harm as long as they believe someone else is responsible. The experiment became a psychological earthquake. It forced the world to reconsider how atrocities happen, not because monsters exist, but because regular people follow orders. To this day, the Milgram obedience experiment remains one of the most shocking, controversial, and eye-opening studies ever done. And its lesson is simple. The scariest thing about obedience is how easy it is.
This is the story the U.S. government denied for years. A program so secret, so unhinged, and so unethical that today it still sounds like science fiction. But it wasn't fiction. It was Project MKUltra, the CIA's obsession with mind control. It began in the early 1950s, during the peak of the Cold War. The CIA became terrified that enemies had discovered a drug or technique to control the human mind. So someone inside the agency asked the question no one should ever ask: what if we create our own? That question unleashed 2 decades of hidden experiments on citizens, soldiers, prisoners, mental patients, and even CIA employees, often without their knowledge. The weapon of choice? LSD. The CIA bought the entire world's supply of it, literally. They purchased so much LSD that for years Sandoz Pharmaceuticals, the company that created the drug, was basically forced to sell it directly to the U.S. government. And the experiments began. Some were mild, most were not. People were given LSD without warning, in hospitals, in offices, in brothels, in safe houses built by the CIA. Agents wanted to see what happened when a person lost all sense of reality and didn't know why. One of the most infamous branches was Operation Midnight Climax, where the CIA hired sex workers to lure men into hidden rooms. Behind a one-way mirror, CIA operatives watched while the unsuspecting men were secretly dosed with LSD. They weren't studying medicine. They were studying manipulation, blackmail, interrogation, and how to break the human mind. In psychiatric hospitals, the experiments were even worse.
Patients were already vulnerable, were given massive doses of LSD for days or weeks. Some were put into drug-induced comas. Others were subjected to sensory deprivation, white noise torture, or hypnosis. The goal was simple and horrifying: erase the mind and rebuild it. One doctor in Canada ran a program called psychic driving, where patients were drugged, restrained, and forced to listen to looping messages for hours upon hours. Many of them were permanently damaged. Some forgot how to speak. Some forgot their families. Some woke up with their identities shattered. And then there was Frank Olson, a CIA scientist who was dosed with LSD without his knowledge. Days later, he fell or was pushed from a 13th-story hotel window. The CIA claimed it was suicide. His family spent decades fighting to uncover the truth. MKUltra destroyed lives in silence and left families searching for answers that the government refused to give. By the mid-1970s, the truth finally began to leak out. Congress launched an investigation, but before they could gather evidence, the CIA destroyed thousands of documents. What survived was only a fraction, but even that fraction was enough to reveal a nightmare more disturbing than any conspiracy theory. MKUltra taught the world one chilling lesson: the human mind is powerful, fragile, and in the wrong hands, terrifyingly easy to break. To this day, no one knows how many people were affected, how many memories were wiped, how many lives were rewritten, and how much we still don't know.
Imagine a government so desperate for an advantage that it secretly hired psychics, clairvoyants, and mind readers to spy on enemy nations. Sounds like a movie, right? But this wasn't fiction. This was Project Stargate, the CIA's real, decades-long attempt to weaponize psychic powers. And the craziest part? Some of it worked. The story begins in the 1970s. American intelligence agencies were terrified that the Soviet Union was pouring millions of dollars into paranormal research. Rumors spread that Soviet scientists were training psychic soldiers, men who could see through walls, locate military targets from thousands of miles away, and even kill with their minds. The CIA panicked. If the enemy was exploring the supernatural, then the U.S. had no choice but to do the same. And so, in secret bases and underground labs, Project Stargate was born. The program recruited a very unusual kind of spy. Not experts in weapons, not elite soldiers, but people who claimed they could use something called remote viewing. A method where a person sits in a silent room, closes their eyes, and attempts to see a hidden location anywhere on Earth. A distant military base, a hostage situation, a nuclear facility. No satellites, no cameras, just the human mind. One of the most famous remote viewers was a man named Joe McMoneagle, a former Army intelligence officer who claimed he could visualize structures, buildings, and events in places he had never visited. In one mission, he described a massive Soviet submarine under construction, a submarine the U.S. military didn't even know existed. Months later, when satellite photos finally caught up, his vision was correct. Another psychic sketched the exact layout of a hostage location in Iran. Another described a secret weapons lab in China. Another claimed to see underground tunnels beneath North Korea. The government didn't believe it at first, but the accuracy was too strange to ignore. As the years passed, Project Stargate expanded. The military tested telepathy, clairvoyance, and even attempts at influencing objects with the mind. Most experiments failed. Some succeeded.
enough to keep the funding flowing for more than 20 years. At one point, Stargate psychics were even asked to spy on UFO sightings, strange artifacts, and unexplained craft. The line between national security and the supernatural began to blur. Behind closed doors, high-ranking officials asked questions they were never supposed to ask. Can consciousness travel outside the body? Can the mind see through time? Does the human brain have hidden abilities we've never understood? But in 1995, after years of secrecy, the project was exposed. Under public pressure, the CIA shut it down. They claimed the results were inconclusive. Yet many of the files remain classified to this day. Some former Stargate members insist the psychic sessions uncovered real intelligence, information impossible to explain by coincidence. Others believe the government didn't end the program, they simply buried it deeper. Project Stargate proved one thing. When fear and curiosity collide, even the most powerful governments will explore the unknown. And sometimes, the unknown stares right back.
In the winter of 1939, inside an orphanage in Iowa, a psychological experiment took place that became so cruel, so damaging, that researchers hid it for decades. It is now known as the Monster Study. Not because monsters were studied, but because monsters conducted it. The experiment was led by a well-respected speech pathologist named Wendell Johnson, a man obsessed with understanding stuttering. He believed that stuttering didn't always come from the child, but from the reaction of adults around them. So he designed an experiment to prove it. The idea was simple, but deeply twisted. Take perfectly normal, healthy children and convince some of them that they had a speech problem. If the children began to stutter, he thought, he would finally have his proof. To test his theory, he chose the most vulnerable group imaginable: orphans. 22 children were selected. Half were told they had excellent speech. They were praised, encouraged, and supported. The other half were told the exact opposite. These perfectly normal kids were told their speech was terrible, that they stuttered, that they needed to be ashamed, that every mistake they made was a failure. Day after day, adults in white coats drilled the same message into their heads. You speak wrong. You're getting worse. You must stop talking so much. The results were devastating. Some children became terrified to speak. Others fell into depression. A few developed lifelong anxiety that followed them into adulthood. And tragically, some of the children actually began to stutter, a condition they never had before. The experiment had succeeded at permanently damaging innocent lives. And remember, these were orphans. They had no parents to protect them, no family to complain, no power to say no. When the study ended, the researchers didn't apologize. They didn't try to fix the damage. They simply buried the files and moved on. For more than 50 years, no one knew what happened inside that orphanage. The children grew up carrying wounds they didn't understand. Some lived their entire lives believing they were broken, never knowing that a scientific experiment had made them that way. It wasn't until the early 2000s that the truth came out. When the surviving orphans finally learned what had been done to them, they described the experience with one word: trauma. The Monster Study stands today as one of the most unethical experiments in scientific history, a chilling reminder that not all horrors involve violence. Some begin with a clipboard,
a lab coat, and a researcher willing to harm a child in the name of science.
In the shadows of apartheid-era South Africa, a secret military experiment took place, one so disturbing, so cruel, and so hidden that for decades almost no one believed it was real. Its name is the Aversion Project, and it turned military hospitals into places of torture, chemical manipulation, and forced conversion. The experiment began in the 1970s inside the South African Defense Force, where being gay was considered a threat not just to the military, but to the state itself. Commanders wanted a solution, and they believed they found it in a psychiatrist named Dr. Aubrey Levin. To the outside world, he was a doctor. Inside the military, he was known by a different title, Dr. Shock. Young soldiers, some barely 16, many drafted against their will, were monitored for any sign of undesirable behavior. If suspected of being gay, they were quietly removed from their units and transported to a military hospital called Ward 22. What happened there felt less like a hospital and more like a prison. The treatment was something called an aversion therapy, but the word therapy was nothing more than a disguise. Patients were strapped to tables and connected to machines. Then they were shown images of men. If they reacted in any way, they were immediately hit with powerful electric shocks. Not small jolts, not medical stimulation, but repeated brutal shocks designed to force the brain to associate attraction with pain. Some victims said they screamed until their voices vanished. Others fainted, only to be revived and shocked again. Dr. Levin believed he could cure people with trauma. He wasn't curing anyone, he was torturing them. In even darker cases, victims were given massive doses of drugs, hallucinogens, hormone treatments, chemical sedatives, anything that might suppress their identity. But the darkest chapter of the Aversion Project was something almost unspeakable: forced gender reassignment surgeries. If the military couldn't convert a soldier, they sometimes tried to physically change them. Young men, healthy, drafted, scared, were told they would undergo medical procedures. They were never given proper explanations. Some woke up to find their bodies permanently altered. Some were later discharged into psychiatric facilities. Many were abandoned entirely. These were not surgeries. They were mutilations disguised as medicine. For years, no one talked. Victims were threatened, shamed, and silenced. The apartheid regime hid everything behind secrecy laws. The truth finally surfaced only after South Africa collapsed politically and a new government began investigating past human rights abuses. The testimonies were horrifying: electroshock torture, chemical manipulation, forced surgeries, destroyed lives. Yet Dr. Levin never fully faced justice for the Aversion Project. He moved to Canada, continued working as a psychiatrist, and was only years later convicted for unrelated abuse of patients. But the victims of the Aversion Project still carry the scars: physical, emotional, and psychological. The Aversion Project remains one of the darkest medical experiments ever conducted. It revealed what happens when a government sees human identity as something to be corrected and gives absolute power to someone willing to break a human being in the name of ideology. A chilling reminder that the worst experiments aren't always done in laboratories. Sometimes they're done in hospitals, under the banner of treatment.
This is the legend that refuses to die. A story whispered in forums, retold in dark corners of the internet, and believed by millions because it feels just real enough to be terrifying. It's called the Russian Sleep Experiment, and even though it's officially just an urban legend, its details are so haunting that it might as well be true. The story begins in the late 1940s, deep inside a secret Soviet military laboratory. Researchers wanted to know one thing: what happens to the human mind when it is forced to stay awake indefinitely? To find out, they selected 5 political prisoners, men who had already been sentenced to death, but they were offered a deal: end 30 days without sleep and earn your freedom. Most would have agreed to anything. The prisoners were sealed inside an airtight chamber. No windows, no clocks, no sunlight. Just a constant flow of an experimental gas designed to eliminate the need for sleep. Cameras watched their every move. At first, everything seemed normal. The men talked amongst themselves, they laughed, they exercised. But on the 5th day, things began to change. Their conversations devolved into paranoia. Whispers filled the chamber. The men began pacing in circles for hours. Their voices grew sharp, frantic, unhinged. By the 9th day, the screaming began. One prisoner ran laps around the chamber, screaming until his vocal cords tore. Another tore pages from a book and smeared them over the tiny window to the outside world, blocking the view entirely. Then, suddenly, silence. Complete, suffocating silence. The scientists panicked. Desperate to know what was happening inside, they used the intercom and gently instructed the prisoners. "We are opening the chamber. Lie on the floor or you will be shot." What came next is the part of the legend people never forget. A calm, steady voice replied, "We no longer want to be freed." When the chamber was finally opened, the scene inside looked like something from a nightmare. The prisoners were alive, but barely human. Their skin was shredded, their bodies were mutilated. Some had torn themselves open with their own hands. And yet, they were awake, wide awake, eyes open, smiling. One man clung to the ceiling like a spider. Another begged the scientists not to let him sleep, screaming that sleep would kill him. Researchers tried sedating them. The prisoners fought with an unhuman strength, ripping through restraints, breaking bones, resisting drugs that should have knocked them unconscious. When asked what they were, one prisoner whispered, "We are what you hide inside." That line became the legend's most chilling moment. In the story's final scene, when one of the dying prisoners is finally put under anesthesia and begins to drift into sleep, he uses his last breath to warn the scientists, "The moment I close my eyes, I will cease to exist." Is any of this true? No. There was no chamber, no gas, no experiment. But the reason this legend became famous is not because it happened, but because it feels like it could have happened. It taps into a primal fear, the fear of losing control of your own mind, the fear of being watched, the fear of never sleeping again. The Russian sleep experiment is a modern horror myth, terrifying, impossible, and unforgettable.
This is one of the darkest chapters in human history. A place so horrifying, so inhumane, that even the soldiers who worked there refused to speak of it for decades. Its name was Unit 731, and it was not a laboratory. It was a slaughterhouse disguised as science. The year was 1936. Japan was preparing for total war, and behind the scenes, a secret research facility was built in occupied Manchuria. It was led by General Shiro Ishii, a man obsessed with biological warfare, not just studying diseases, but weaponizing them. To Ishii, prisoners were not human beings. They were logs, disposable, replaceable, and ready for experimentation. Thousands of men, women, and children, Chinese civilians, Russian prisoners, Korean captives, Mongolians, and even some Allied soldiers were taken to Unit 731. Once inside, they never came out. And what happened to them remains some of the most horrifying acts ever committed in the name of science. The experiments began with vivisection. Victims were tied to tables and cut open alive, without anesthesia. Scientists wanted to see how organs reacted in real time. They removed stomachs, amputated limbs, reattached them to different parts of the body, and observed the slow, agonizing results. Some victims had their arms frozen until the flesh turned solid like ice. Then guards struck the limbs with bats to see how quickly they shattered. This was not medicine. This was cruelty under a microscope. Then came the diseases: plague, anthrax, cholera, typhus. Unit 731 bred them in giant vats and injected them into prisoners to study symptoms, spread, and mortality. In one experiment, victims were tied to stakes. Fleas infected with the bubonic plague were released onto them. Scientists observed how long it took for the disease to consume the body. Entire villages in China were secretly bombed with pathogens to test how effective these biological weapons could be in real war. Millions were at risk. Thousands died, screaming in fevers created by human hands. Other experiments were even more disturbing. Prisoners were locked in pressure chambers until their eyes exploded. Some were spun in giant centrifuges until their organs tore apart. Others were burned with flamethrowers to study thermal injury. Many were deliberately starved, dehydrated, or subjected to extreme cold and heat. Women were raped and forced into pregnancies so researchers could study unborn babies, most of whom were killed in experiments as well. Infants, children, elderly, no one was spared. But the darkest part of this story is what happened after the war. When World War II ended, Unit 731 should have become one of the biggest war crime trials in history. Instead, the U.S. offered Ishii and his scientists full immunity in exchange for their research. The people who committed these atrocities walked free. Many went on to become doctors, professors, and leaders in post-war Japan. The victims never saw justice. Today, Unit 731 stands as a symbol of the absolute worst humanity is capable of. A place where science was twisted into a weapon, where suffering was data, and where death was nothing more than another variable to measure. It is a reminder that the greatest horrors do not always come from monsters, but from ordinary people who choose to stop seeing others as human.
In 1965, a routine circumcision accident changed the life of an infant boy named Bruce Reimer forever. His parents, terrified and desperate, were convinced by the influential psychologist Dr. John Money to raise their son as a girl instead. Money believed that gender identity was completely shaped by upbringing, not biology, and he saw Bruce as the perfect test subject. Bruce was renamed Brenda, dressed in girls' clothes, and pushed into a life he had never chosen. Dr. Money documented everything, claiming the experiment was a success, even though behind the scenes, Brenda resisted every step. She rejected dolls, tore apart girls' outfits, preferred rough play, and constantly insisted she felt like a boy. But money ignored every sign, forcing gender reinforcement sessions that Brenda found humiliating and traumatizing. By age 13, the truth shattered everything. Brenda's parents finally revealed what had happened: the botched surgery, the forced gender transition, the years of manipulation. Brenda immediately chose to live as male again, now taking the name David, beginning hormone therapy and later undergoing surgery to reclaim the identity he felt was always his. The world later learned the truth. Dr. Money's success story was a fabrication. His experiment caused decades of psychological suffering, became a symbol of unethical research, and remains one of the clearest examples of how dangerous it is when science ignores consent, identity, and humanity. A tragic experiment that changed psychology forever.
In 1920, psychologists John B. Watson and Rosalie Reimer set out to answer a disturbing question. Can you create fear in a human who wasn't afraid before? Their test subject? A 9-month-old baby known only as Little Albert. At first, Albert showed no fear of anything. Not animals, not masks, not even a white lab rat placed in front of him. He reached for it happily. But Watson and Reimer had other plans. Each time the rat appeared, they slammed a steel bar with a hammer right behind Albert's head, an explosive, terrifying noise. The baby would cry, shake, and flinch in panic. And after repeating this pairing again and again, something chilling happened. Albert began to fear the rat alone. Then it spread. He grew terrified of anything white and fluffy: rabbits, dogs, fur coats, even Santa Claus masks. One induced fear multiplied into many, proving how easily emotions could be conditioned, shaped, and twisted. What makes the experiment even darker is what happened next. Albert was never desensitized. The researchers never reversed the fear they created. They simply ended the study, leaving a baby with lasting psychological trauma. The Little Albert experiment is now infamous, a haunting reminder of how far early psychology was willing to go, how fragile human emotions are, and how a single sound changed a child's mind.
Imagine a secret government program where sex, drugs, and surveillance collide, all in the name of intelligence gathering. This was Operation Midnight Climax, a bizarre and disturbing branch of the CIA's infamous MKUltra mind control experiments. The story begins in the 1950s, at the height of the Cold War. The CIA was obsessed with one terrifying question: could the human mind be manipulated, controlled, or broken using drugs and sexual stimuli? To find out, they created a network of secret brothels in San Francisco and New York. Yes, a brothel, but not just any brothel. Inside, undercover CIA operatives observed clients through one-way mirrors, taking notes on every reaction. The method was simple but cruel. Unwitting men, often random citizens, were lured in by attractive women. Once inside, they were secretly dosed with LSD or other psychoactive drugs. Then the CIA watched, recorded, and analyzed. Some men were completely unaware of the drug. Others panicked as their minds unraveled. Hallucinations, paranoia, fear, and euphoria all unfolding in real time. Sometimes sessions lasted hours, leaving participants traumatized or disoriented. Sometimes men would act in bizarre ways, laughing, crying, or revealing secrets they would normally never speak aloud. The goal? The CIA wanted to discover: could LSD be used to extract secrets from prisoners? Could it manipulate behavior for espionage? Could sexual arousal combined with hallucinogens create a state where the mind was completely controllable? In essence, they were testing psychological breaking points, human consciousness as a battlefield. The results were ethically horrifying. Some subjects suffered long-term psychological trauma, panic attacks, and memory disturbances. The women who acted as agents often witnessed firsthand the suffering of men whose minds they were unknowingly breaking. Yet the CIA considered it valuable intelligence research. Eventually, Operation Midnight Climax was shut down, along with other MK programs in the 1970s. Documents were destroyed. Victims never knew they had been experimented upon. The world learned about the program only decades later, when surviving files were declassified. Operation Midnight Climax remains one of the most surreal and disturbing government experiments in history. A place where sex and drugs became instruments of control, where people's minds were manipulated without consent, and where the line between science and sadism was erased entirely. It is a reminder that sometimes the most unbelievable horrors are not fiction. They are buried in classified files, waiting to be uncovered.
From 1932 to 1972, in Macon County, Alabama, the U.S. Public Health Service conducted one of the most shocking and unethical experiments in American history. It is now remembered as the Tuskegee Syphilis study, a study that betrayed trust, humanity, and ethics. The study began under the guise of treatment for bad blood, a vague term used locally to describe several illnesses. The real target? African American men with syphilis. Around 600 men were recruited, 399 with syphilis, 201 without, as a control group. Crucially, none of them were told the truth. They were promised free medical care, meals, and burial assurance. But the care was a lie. The disease was left untreated intentionally. Over the decades, researchers meticulously observed the men's bodies as syphilis progressed. Pain, sores, blindness, heart failure, brain damage, everything was recorded. And when penicillin became the known cure in the 1940s, the men were denied treatment. Even when they asked, even when doctors knew it could save their lives, they were left to suffer. The human cost was staggering. Men suffered unimaginable physical deterioration. Families were devastated. Many children were born with congenital syphilis. Dozens died directly because treatment was withheld. The experiment continued for 40 years, only ending in 1972 after a whistleblower exposed the study to the press. The public reaction was outrage. The government had used deception, racial exploitation, and medical authority to kill slowly, scientifically, methodically. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment changed the world of medicine forever. It led to new ethical guidelines, including informed consent, the right to withdraw from studies, and institutional review boards to protect human subjects. But the damage to trust, especially in African American communities, lasted generations. Tuskegee is a chilling reminder. Science without ethics is not progress, it is cruelty. And when authority is abused, lives can be destroyed in the name of research.
Between 1946 and 1948, the U.S. government conducted one of the most shocking human experiments in history. The target? Innocent people in Guatemala, prisoners, soldiers, mental patients, and orphans. The goal? To study the transmission and treatment of sexually transmitted diseases. This was no medical breakthrough. It was deliberate infection, deception, and extreme abuse. Doctors from the U.S. Public Health Service, led by Dr. John Cutler, the same man later involved in the Tuskegee syphilis study, traveled to Guatemala with a horrifying plan. They infected 1,500 to 5,000 people with syphilis, gonorrhea, and chancroid. They did not ask for consent. The victims had no idea what was being done to them. Some were raped by soldiers or prostitutes who were intentionally infected. Others were intentionally exposed in hospitals or prisons under the guise of treatment. The results were recorded meticulously. Doctors watched diseases progress, documented pain, and tracked transmission. They experimented with different methods of infection, topical application, injections, and sexual exposure. Patients were denied proper treatment in many cases. Many suffered long-term illness or death. Even when penicillin became widely available, it was not given to all the victims. Some received partial treatment, others nothing at all. The Guatemala STD experiments remained top secret for decades. The victims were largely forgotten. The ethical violations, coercion, assault, and infection without consent were unprecedented, even compared to other studies of the era. It wasn't until 2010 that the US government officially apologized. By then, most victims had already died, and survivors carried the trauma for the rest of their lives. The Guatemala STD experiments are a chilling reminder that science without morality is deadly. They reveal the dark lengths governments will go in the name of research, and the human cost when ethics are ignored completely.
In the summer of 1954, psychologist Muzafer Sharif conducted an experiment that revealed the shocking truth. Humans are wired to form groups, and sometimes groups are wired to hate each other. The experiment took place at Robbers Cave State Park in Oklahoma. 22 boys, all 11 or 12 years old, were recruited for what they thought was a normal summer camp. They were ordinary, middle-class American boys. No history of aggression, no conflicts, just regular kids. The twist? They were divided into two separate groups, unaware of the other. One became the Eagles, the other the Rattlers. At first, each group bonded naturally, campfires, sports, and songs. They became tight-knit, loyal, and proud of their new identities. Everything was normal, until the groups met. Sharif introduced competition, baseball games, tug-of-war, treasure hunts, and prizes. Almost immediately, tension exploded. Name-calling started. Pranks escalated. Trash-talking turned into physical fights. The boys began to hate the other group intensely, not because of anything the other had done, but simply because they were the other group. Sharif called this realistic conflict theory. It showed that even ordinary children in a neutral setting can develop prejudice, hostility, and aggression when competing over resources. The experiment didn't stop there. Sharif wanted to see if he could reverse the hatred. He created superordinate goals, tasks that both groups had to cooperate to achieve. Fix a broken water supply, pull a truck out of mud, share food to survive a staged emergency. Slowly, cooperation replaced conflict. The Eagles and the Rattlers worked together, bonded over shared challenges, and began to respect each other again. The Robbers Cave study revealed a powerful truth. Group identity is easy to form. Intergroup conflict is easy to ignite. Cooperation and shared goals are the key to peace. It wasn't just an experiment. It was a lesson about human nature, about how quickly us versus them thinking can take over, and how fragile harmony really is.
In 1967, high school students in California learned a terrifying truth. You don't need an evil person to create a fascist society, just the right environment. It began as a simple history lesson by teacher Ron Jones at Cubberley High School in Palo Alto. He was teaching about Nazi Germany, and one student asked, how could the German people allow Hitler to gain such power? Jones realized the students didn't understand, and instead of lecturing, he decided to show them. He called it the third wave. Rules were strict. Students had to sit up straight, respond quickly, and salute when entering the classroom. Discipline and order were praised. Loyalty was rewarded. Individuality was punished. Jones created symbols, slogans, and chants. Membership cards were distributed. Students were organized into a group where belonging and obedience became everything. At first, it seemed harmless. Kids liked the structure and the sense of belonging, but it escalated fast. Students began policing each other, reporting infractions, and enforcing loyalty. The sense of competition, peer pressure, and fear of being excluded mirrored real authoritarian regimes. Within days, students were intimidated, eager to please, and obedient to rules that just hours earlier they would have laughed at. The experiment spiraled further when students attempted to expand the third wave outside the classroom. It grew beyond Jones's control. Kids were recruiting friends, enforcing rules, and even threatening those who resisted. Jones realized he had created a miniature fascist movement in his own school in under a week. On the final day, he revealed the truth. There was no movement, no ideology, no power, only the simulation. The students were shocked. Many admitted they had been willing to participate in cruelty simply to belong. The third wave experiment showed a terrifying reality. Ordinary people can adopt authoritarian behavior almost instantly. Obedience and conformity can override morality. Fascism is not born in monsters. It grows in ordinary communities fueled by loyalty, order, and fear. It remains one of the clearest demonstrations of how social pressure and group identity can turn decent people into complicit participants in oppression.
In 1950, the U.S. Navy conducted an experiment that would shock anyone who believes in the safety of everyday life. It was called Operation Sea Spray, and it involved releasing bacteria over a major city without telling anyone. The target? San Francisco. The goal? To test whether biological agents could be spread over urban areas and to study how far bacteria could travel in the air. The Navy didn't pick a lab or an isolated field. They picked a real populated city. They used Serratia marsensens and Bacillus globigerinae, bacteria considered harmless at the time. Planes flew over the city, spraying the bacteria in fine mist. People walked, shopped, ate, and breathed, completely unaware that invisible particles were floating in the air. Within days, something alarming happened. Hospitals reported a strange increase in infections. Some people developed urinary tract infections and pneumonia. One death may have been linked to the experiment, though official records are unclear. Still, the Navy continued. For days, bacteria were released to measure how they spread, where they landed, and how effective they were as a biological weapon. San Francisco residents had no idea they were part of a secret test. The operation remained classified for decades. When the public learned of it, outrage was immediate. The idea that a government could experiment on its own citizens without consent seemed unbelievable, but it had happened. Operation Sea Spray is a chilling reminder that science can cross ethical lines under the guise of national security. It raises questions we still wrestle with today. How far can governments go to test weapons? How safe is the air we breathe? And who decides whether people become unwitting test subjects? In the 1950s, the U.S. military conducted an experiment that sounds like it belongs in a horror movie. It was called Operation Big Buzz, and its mission was to test mosquitoes as biological weapons. Yes, mosquitoes, tiny, ordinary insects turned into instruments of war. The experiment took place in Georgia, over farmland and small towns. The goal? To see if Aedes aegypti mosquitoes, the species known for spreading yellow fever, could be dropped from planes, survive the fall, and spread disease to humans. Thousands of mosquitoes were raised in labs, infected with a harmless virus for the test, and released from airplanes. The scientists wanted to observe how far the mosquitoes would fly, how many would survive the drop, whether they would bite humans and transmit disease. Volunteers in the area weren't told the details. Farmers, children, and townspeople unknowingly became part of the study. Some people reported being swarmed by thousands of aggressive mosquitoes, leaving red, itchy welts. The scientists tracked how many mosquitoes landed, bit, and survived, recording every terrifying detail. Operation Big Buzz demonstrated one thing very clearly. Biological warfare could be deployed silently, invisibly, and with terrifying efficiency. It also raised ethical questions. Is it acceptable to put civilians at risk for military research? Should the greater good justify secret experiments? The operation remains one of the strangest and most disturbing Cold War experiments. During the Cold War, the CIA didn't just study weapons, spies, or psychology. They explored something far stranger, something paranormal, mystical, and occult. This secretive program was called Project MKOFTEN. The goal of MKOFTEN was bizarre yet chilling. Could the government harness the supernatural for espionage, mind control, or influence operations? CIA operatives worked with psychics, occult practitioners, astrologers, and mystics. They experimented with everything from tarot readings and astrology to ritual magic, all in an effort to see if hidden forces could be used as tools of national security. MKOFTEN was closely linked to other CIA programs, including MKUltra, but with a twist. While MKUltra focused on chemicals and psychology, MKOFTEN focused on supernatural manipulation. Some of the experiments included using psychics to predict enemy movements, testing whether rituals could influence decisions or outcomes, exploring parapsychology and clairvoyance for intelligence gathering. Documents declassified later reveal that the CIA spent years trying to quantify the unquantifiable. Some reports claimed success, some failure, but the program left the agency intrigued and obsessed with the possibility that the human mind could tap into forces beyond science. The secrecy around MKOFTEN was intense. Even within the CIA, only a handful of people knew what was being done. Field agents often conducted bizarre tests without fully understanding them, leaving a trail of mysterious notes, experiments, and unexplained phenomena. MKOFTEN remains a symbol of Cold War paranoia. When science isn't enough, governments may turn to the mystical, the occult, and the unknown. It reminds us that in the pursuit of power, the human mind, its limits, mysteries, and beliefs becomes a laboratory
and reality can blur with superstition, fear, and ambition.
In the late 1960s, psychologist Walter Mischel conducted an experiment that seems simple, but reveals something profound about human nature. It is now known as the Marshmallow test, and it asks a deceptively simple question: can you wait for something better? The experiment involved preschool-aged children, usually around 4 to 6 years old. Each child was placed in a room with a single marshmallow, or sometimes a cookie or pretzel. The rules were simple. If they ate the treat immediately, they got only that one marshmallow. If they waited 15 minutes while the experimenter left the room, they would receive 2 treats instead of 1. Some children could not resist. They grabbed the marshmallow instantly, ate it quickly, and sat there licking sticky fingers. Others stared at the marshmallow, turned away, covered their eyes, or even hummed to distract themselves. Some sat patiently, counting the seconds, waiting for the promised reward. Mischel followed these children for years. The results were astonishing. Kids who could delay gratification often went on to have better academic performance, higher SAT scores, and better emotional control. Those who couldn't wait were more likely to struggle with impulsivity, stress management, and long-term planning. The experiment suggested that the ability to control impulses and plan for the future is as crucial as intelligence or talent. But the marshmallow test also revealed something deeper. Environmental factors matter. Children who grow up in uncertain or stressful conditions often eat the treat immediately, not because they lack willpower, but because trust and resources are uncertain. In other words, self-control isn't just biology. It's shaped by experience, trust, and social context. The marshmallow test became a cultural icon. It's referenced in psychology, education, parenting, and business, and it remains a simple, elegant, and powerful illustration of one of life's most fundamental challenges. Can we wait for the better reward? Or do we give in to instant gratification?
In the 1950s and 1960s, psychologist Harlow conducted an experiment that changed the way the world understands love, attachment, and human development, using monkeys. Harlow wanted to answer a simple but profound question. Do infants bond with their mothers for food or for comfort and emotional security? Harlow separated infant rhesus monkeys from their real mothers at birth. He created 2 artificial mothers for the babies, one made of wire with a bottle to provide milk, one made of soft cloth providing no food but a comforting tactile presence. The monkeys had to choose survival through nourishment or emotional comfort through touch. The results were shocking. The infant monkeys clung to the cloth mother for almost all comfort, only going to the wire mother briefly to feed. When frightened by a mechanical toy or loud noise, they ran to the soft, comforting mother, not the wire one with food. Harlow concluded, love, comfort, and security matter more than just physical sustenance. The need for emotional connection is fundamental, even in monkeys. The study had profound implications for humans. It demonstrated that children deprived of nurturing care could develop severe social and emotional deficits. Orphans and abused children were now understood through a lens of attachment theory. The absence of love can have lasting effects on development. But the experiment was controversial. The monkeys were isolated, often developing abnormal behaviors, rocking, self-harming, and social withdrawal. Harlow's work sparked
ethical debates about how far science should go in the name of understanding human nature. Harlow's wire mother experiment revealed one undeniable truth. Humans and many animals crave comfort, connection, and love as much as we crave food. It changed psychology, child development, and even parenting practices forever.
In 1973, social psychologists John Darley and Daniel Batson conducted an experiment that revealed a surprising truth about human behavior. We aren't always as compassionate as we think. It's known as the Good Samaritan experiment, inspired by the biblical story of the Samaritan who helped a stranger in need. The study involved seminary students at Princeton Theological Seminary. They were told they had to give a lecture on the parable of the Good Samaritan. Then came the twist. Each student had to walk across campus to deliver their talk. Along the way, a man slumped in a doorway, coughing and groaning, clearly in distress. But here's the kicker. Some students were told they were running late. Others were told they had plenty of time to reach the lecture. The results were shocking. Of the students rushing and stressed, only 10% stopped to help. Of the students with no time pressure, about 63% offered assistance. Even more surprisingly, the content of their lecture didn't affect their behavior. Seminary students talking about helping others were often too busy to act like Good Samaritans themselves. The Good Samaritan experiment revealed something uncomfortable about human nature. Situational factors often matter more than moral beliefs. Being good in theory doesn't always translate to being good in practice. Stress, time pressure, and distractions can override our sense of empathy. The experiment remains a classic study in social psychology, reminding us even the kindest, most moral people can fail to help, not out of malice, but because of circumstances beyond their control. It challenges us to ask, are we living our values or just talking about them?
In 1973, psychologist David Rosenhan conducted an experiment that shook the foundations of psychiatry. He asked a chilling question. Can psychiatrists reliably distinguish the sane from the insane? The answer, as it turned out, was not always. Rosenhan recruited 8 pseudo-patients, healthy men and women with no history of mental illness. Each pseudo-patient pretended to hear a single word, empty, hollow, or thud, once. They then reported other aspects of their lives truthfully, claiming no other symptoms. All were admitted to psychiatric hospitals with diagnoses like schizophrenia. Once inside, the pseudo-patients behaved normally. They took notes, read, and interacted politely with staff. They asked questions about discharge procedures. They followed every hospital rule. Yet their behavior was always interpreted as pathological. Normal acts, like writing notes, pacing, or talking to other patients, were seen as symptoms of their supposed illness. The result? The pseudo-patients were kept hospitalized for 7 to 52 days, with an average of 19 days. Staff never detected their sanity. Other patients, however, often recognized the deception, describing them as sane. Rosenhan concluded, psychiatric labels can overshadow observation. Once someone is labeled schizophrenic, everything they do is seen through that lens, even normal behavior. The experiment sparked a revolution in mental health. Hospitals revised admission and discharge policies. Psychiatrists began questioning diagnostic methods. It ignited debates on the power of labeling, stigma, and the subjectivity of mental illness. Rosenhan's study remains a powerful reminder.
Sometimes the system designed to help the vulnerable can fail them. And sometimes the biggest barriers to understanding are preconceptions, labels, and assumptions, not reality itself.
In 1968, teacher Jane Elliott conducted one of the most powerful social experiments ever in a third-grade classroom in Riceville, Iowa. The purpose? To teach children the reality of discrimination the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Elliott divided her students based on eye color, blue-eyed students and brown-eyed students. On the first day, she told the class that blue-eyed children were superior, smarter, faster, and better behaved. Brown-eyed children were told they were inferior, lazy, and less intelligent. The results were immediate and shocking. Blue-eyed children became bossy, cruel, and arrogant, enforcing rules and mocking their peers. Brown-eyed children became submissive, anxious, and self-conscious, performing poorly on tests, even though they were perfectly capable. Elliott then reversed the roles the next day, making brown-eyed students superior and blue-eyed students inferior. The results repeated themselves. Children quickly adapted to the expectations and labels imposed upon them. The Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes experiment revealed a disturbing truth about human behavior. Prejudice is learned, not innate. Discrimination shapes performance, self-esteem, and behavior. Ordinary people, even children, can quickly adopt arbitrary hierarchies and social biases. This exercise didn't just stay in the classroom, it became a global lesson in empathy, bias, and social justice. It showed that even small acts of labeling, teasing, or exclusion can dramatically alter behavior and self-perception. The experiment remains a powerful reminder. Discrimination is not natural, it's taught. And by teaching equality, fairness, and empathy, we can undo the damage that prejudice inflicts on minds young and old.
In 1957, public health officials in Westport, Connecticut, conducted an experiment that blurred the line between reality and fear. It was a plague simulation, designed to study human behavior during a contagious outbreak. The setup was simple, but chilling. Health authorities pretended that a deadly plague had broken out. A neighborhood was effectively quarantined without warning. Residents were given strict orders: stay inside, avoid contact, and follow sanitation protocols. Meanwhile, scientists observed how people reacted to sudden isolation, how panic and compliance spread, how individuals adapted or rebelled against strict rules. The results were surprising. Most residents initially followed instructions, showing obedience and concern for community safety. But as hours passed, stress and fear grew. Some ignored rules, sneaked outside, or attempted to communicate secretly with neighbors. Rumors and misinformation spread quickly, creating mini panic cycles within the quarantined area. The Westport quarantine revealed something critical about human behavior. Stress and fear amplify social dynamics. Even compliant populations can experience panic, rebellion, and misinformation during emergencies. Leadership, communication, and trust are essential to manage crises. While the experiment caused no real infections, it served as a warning and blueprint for public health strategies in epidemics. It foreshadowed modern-day challenges. How do people react in lockdowns? How does fear affect decision-making and cooperation? How fragile is public trust in authorities during emergencies? The Westport quarantine stands as a fascinating and eerie social experiment, a glimpse into the human psyche under threat, isolation, and uncertainty, and a lesson in how quickly order
can give way to chaos.
In 1962, at the Lincoln Park Zoo in Oklahoma City, scientists attempted one of the most bizarre and controversial experiments ever conducted. They tried to make an elephant high on LSD. The goal? To study how psychedelics would affect a massive animal's brain and behavior. What followed became one of the most disturbing moments in animal research history. Researchers targeted Tuskegee, a 14-year-old African elephant weighing more than 3 tons. Instead of using a carefully measured dose, they injected him with 297 milligrams of LSD, the equivalent of 3,000 human doses in a single blast. Within seconds, chaos began. Tuskegee roared, collapsed to his knees, and thrashed violently. His entire body trembled. His pupils blew wide. His nervous system spiraled out of control. This was not a psychedelic trip. It was a catastrophic overdose. Panicking, the team tried to treat him by injecting massive amounts of antipsychotics and barbiturates. But these drugs only worsened the storm raging inside Tuskegee's body. For one intense hour, the zoo became a scene of confusion, fear, and regret. Crowds watched helplessly as the giant elephant convulsed, struggled to breathe, and finally fell silent. Tuskegee was dead. A scientific stunt became a tragedy. The elephant tranquilizer overdose experiment remains infamous for one reason. It revealed what happens when curiosity overwhelms ethics. Instead of learning about psychedelic effects, researchers learned something far more important. Animals are not experimental toys. Psychedelics are not simple substances to test. Careless science leads to irreversible consequences. Tuskegee's death became a global example of why strict ethics are essential in research. It stands as a somber reminder that some experiments don't reveal what we want to know. They reveal what we should never do again.
In the 1940s and 1950s, scientists became fascinated by a question: how do blind individuals navigate the world without sight? This led to the Human Echolocalization Study, a groundbreaking experiment that revealed the extraordinary adaptability of the human brain. The experiment involved blind participants, often adults who had lost sight early in life. Researchers created controlled spaces, rooms filled with obstacles, corridors, and objects. The participants were trained to use echolocalization, a technique similar to sonar. They would click their tongue or tap a cane. The sound would bounce off surfaces and return as echoes. The brain would interpret these echoes to determine distance, shape, and location. The results were astonishing. Blind participants could detect walls, doorways, and furniture, navigate complex mazes without touching anything, identify objects based solely on sound reflections. Researchers discovered that the brain adapts, repurposing the auditory cortex to process spatial information, essentially allowing the blind to see with sound. The study revealed profound truths about human perception. Sight is not the only way to understand space. The brain is remarkably plastic, capable of rewiring itself in response to sensory loss. Humans have untapped potential to perceive the world in entirely different ways. The Human Echolocalization Study paved the way for modern echolocalization training for the blind, assistive technologies that use sound to map environments, deeper understanding of neuroplasticity and sensory compensation. This experiment shows that limits are often illusions. When one sense is lost, others can rise to extraordinary levels, proving that perception is not just about the eyes, but about the brain's incredible ability to adapt.
Deep in underground tunnels of East Africa lives a tiny, strange creature, the naked mole rat. Unlike most mammals, these hairless rodents can survive in conditions that would kill almost any other animal: low oxygen, high carbon dioxide, and complete darkness. Scientists became fascinated and designed experiments to understand how far their resilience could go. In the lab, naked mole rats were exposed to extremely low oxygen levels, far below what humans can tolerate. Other mammals would suffocate within minutes. The mole rats? They slowed their metabolism, reduced their heart rate, and survived for over 18 minutes in near-zero oxygen environments. Researchers also observed their blood chemistry changes to store oxygen efficiently. Their brains switch to anaerobic metabolism, producing energy without oxygen. They tolerate high levels of carbon dioxide that would be toxic to humans. The experiments revealed why naked mole rats rarely die in their cramped, low-oxygen burrows. They have a unique adaptation of hemoglobin, letting oxygen bind and release efficiently. Their cells are resistant to damage caused by oxygen deprivation. They produce chemicals that protect neurons from dying even under extreme stress. These studies aren't just about weird biology. They have profound implications for humans. Insights into stroke and heart attack treatments. Understanding hypoxia resistance in critical care. Potential for longevity research, since naked mole rats also live extraordinarily long lives for rodents. The naked mole rat oxygen tolerance tests reveal one simple truth: nature sometimes outperforms science. Survival isn't just about strength, it's about adaptation, efficiency, and resilience at the cellular level.
In 1991, a team of 8 scientists and engineers entered a sealed glass and steel structure in the Arizona desert called Biosphere 2. Their mission? To live in complete isolation and create a self-sustaining ecosystem that could support human life for 2 years. The idea was audacious. Could humans survive in a closed ecological system, mimicking life on another planet like Mars? Inside Biosphere 2, everything had to be recycled and balanced. Plants and trees provided oxygen and food. Waste was reused as fertilizer. Water had to be carefully managed. Air, temperature, and humidity were continuously monitored. At first, it seemed like a dream come true. Lush gardens, fish ponds, and even a desert and rainforest habitat all inside one enormous building. But soon, challenges emerged. Oxygen levels dropped dangerously low, leaving the crew fatigued and dizzy. Food shortages became real as crops failed and yields were low. Tensions rose. Arguing, stress, and paranoia became part of daily life. Relationships fractured, and the crew struggled to maintain cooperation under isolation. By the end of the experiment, the team had survived, but at a high psychological and physical cost. Biosphere 2 revealed some startling truths. Closed ecosystems are harder to maintain than anyone imagined. Human psychology under isolation is just as challenging as the physical environment. Cooperation, trust, and resilience are critical when resources are limited and pressures are high. The experiment became a symbol of human ambition and hubris,
a cautionary tale about the difficulty of creating a perfect, self-sustaining world. Yet it also inspired research into space colonization, ecological engineering, and sustainable living. Biosphere 2 shows that survival isn't just about food and air. It's about psychology, teamwork, and adaptability. Even in a world you design, humans remain the most unpredictable element.
In the 1960s, during the height of the Cold War, the CIA launched one of the strangest espionage projects in history. A mission so unbelievable it sounds like satire, but it was real, expensive, and ultimately disastrous. They called it Project Acoustic Kitty. The idea was simple on paper, yet outrageous in execution. What if a cat could be turned into a living surveillance device? Cats wander anywhere. Cats don't draw suspicion. Cats can sit beside foreign diplomats without anyone thinking twice. So the CIA decided to implant surveillance equipment inside a real cat. In a high-security lab, surgeons performed an operation on a gray and white stray. A tiny microphone was implanted in its ear. A small radio transmitter was placed near its skull. A super-thin antenna was woven through its fur along the spine. The whole system was powered by a miniature battery hidden inside its body. This enhanced animal became the world's first biological spy tool. The CIA spent over $20 million on the project. They trained the cat for months, teaching it to approach specific targets on command, a nearly impossible task because, as any cat owner knows, cats don't follow orders. Finally, the day of the mission arrived. The target? 2 men sitting on a park bench outside a foreign embassy in Washington, D.C. Acoustic Kitty was released. The CIA team held their breath, and then the cat wandered into the road and was immediately struck by a taxi, ending the mission in seconds. The project was quietly scrapped. The CIA finally admitted what the rest of the world could have told them for free: cats cannot be controlled. Cats do not follow commands, and cats make terrible government operatives. Project Acoustic Kitty became a symbol of Cold War absurdity, a reminder that even the most well-funded agencies can come up with ideas too ridiculous for reality. But in the end, the experiment revealed one eternal truth. You can teach a dog to be loyal. You can train a pigeon to carry messages, but you can never turn a cat into a spy.
In the 1960s and 1970s, scientists began pushing the boundaries of human endurance. One of the most extreme and ethically controversial experiments was the Dead Man Switch sleep deprivation study. The goal? To see how long a human could go without sleep and what happens when the body and mind reach the breaking point. Volunteers, or sometimes prisoners and military personnel, were placed in controlled rooms with continuous observation. They were monitored for hours, days, and eventually weeks without sleep. Every movement, every word, every heartbeat was recorded. To prevent the participants from falling asleep, researchers used stimuli like lights, noise, and mild shocks. The dead man switch concept meant that if a participant fell asleep or lost consciousness, a mechanical alarm or shock would immediately rouse them, a literal life or death test of wakefulness. The results were horrifying. Within 24 to 48 hours, cognitive function declined, memory faded, and mood deteriorated. After 72 hours, hallucinations and paranoia appeared. After 1 week, participants experienced complete disorientation, psychotic episodes, and body tremors. Some showed long-term psychological damage, including anxiety, depression, and chronic insomnia.
The study revealed brutal truths about human limits. The brain cannot function indefinitely without sleep. Mental and physical collapse can occur even when the body is well-fed and hydrated. Extreme stress and forced wakefulness can break the mind before the body fails. Though shocking, the dead man switch experiments influenced modern science. Military research on extended vigilance and alertness. Understanding the consequences of sleep deprivation on cognition. Medical studies on sleep disorders, hallucinations, and mental health. The dead man switch remains a stark reminder. Sleep is not optional. The mind demands it, and when denied, even the strongest human body can unravel in terrifying ways.
In the final years of World War II, scientists at the University of Minnesota launched one of the most intense and psychologically devastating experiments ever conducted. The mission wasn't cruelty, it was survival research. They wanted to understand how to refeed millions of starving civilians after the war. To do that, they needed volunteers willing to suffer, and 36 young men, conscientious objectors who refused to fight but wanted to help humanity, stepped forward. The experiment had 3 phases, each more grueling than the last. Phase 1, baseline, 12 weeks. The men ate normally. They exercised daily. Researchers recorded every detail: weight, metabolism, strength, mental health. They were healthy, optimistic, and ready. They had no idea how deeply hunger would break them. Phase 2, starvation, 24 weeks. Their calories were slashed in half, about 1,500 calories a day, the diet of a famine victim. They still walked long distances daily. Slowly, the human body began to collapse. Body temperatures dropped, faces grew hollow, muscles wasted away, skin cracked, hearts weakened, but the mind suffered even more. The men became obsessed with food. They dreamed of it, talked about it, collected recipes for magazines. Some chewed gum until their jaws ached. Others diluted oatmeal with water to trick their brain into feeling full. Their personalities shattered. Anxiety skyrocketed. Depression became common. Irritability turned into rage. Friendships collapsed. Some men cried without reason. One participant even chopped off 3 fingers of his own hand. Whether an accident or desperation, no one truly knows. Phase 3, refeeding, 12 weeks. Here came the shocking part. When food was reintroduced, the men did not recover quickly. Their minds were still starving. They ate enormous amounts, sometimes 5,000 to 10,000 calories a day, yet felt empty. It took months for weight, hormones, and emotions to stabilize. Researchers learned something vital. Starvation doesn't end when food returns. It rewires the brain. The Minnesota Starvation Experiment changed the world. It reshaped our understanding of eating disorders. It revealed how famine destroys mental health. It influenced humanitarian aid programs worldwide. It proved starvation is not just physical, it is psychological devastation. This experiment remains history's most profound studies of suffering and resilience. It showed how fragile the human mind becomes without nourishment, and how easily hunger can turn hope, personality, and identity into something unrecognizable.
Have you ever misheard a song lyric and convinced yourself it said something completely different? It turns out your brain isn't just hearing music, it's predicting, interpreting, and sometimes fabricating reality. This phenomenon became the focus of a series of brain perception experiments in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Researchers would play songs with ambiguous or unclear lyrics to volunteers. Participants were asked to write down or repeat exactly what they heard. Almost immediately, fascinating patterns emerged. Many people inserted words that made sense, even if they weren't in the song. Brain scans showed auditory and language processing areas working overtime to fill in the gaps. Cultural background, expectations, and memory all influenced what people thought they heard. For example, the Beatles' "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds" was often heard as "Lucy in Disguise with Diamonds." Jimi Hendrix's lyrics were twisted by listeners to fit familiar words or phrases. The experiments revealed something profound. Perception is not passive. Your brain actively interprets sensory input. Memory, expectations, and context shape what you think is reality. Even when presented with the same audio, two people can experience entirely different truths. These tests had implications beyond music. Understanding auditory hallucinations in mental illness, designing better hearing aids and speech recognition technology, exploring how bias and context influence perception in everyday life. The Misheard lyrics brain perception tests show one universal truth. Your brain doesn't just hear the world, it interprets it. Sometimes it's brilliant. Sometimes it's hilariously wrong. And sometimes it reveals how fragile our grasp on reality really is.
Imagine staring at a face that is actually hollow, a mask turned inside out. But your brain insists it is a normal, convex face staring back at you. This is the hollow mask illusion, and it has been the focus of fascinating neuroscience experiments for decades. Researchers discovered that our brains are wired to interpret faces in a specific way. Even when visual evidence says one thing, expectations and prior knowledge dominate perception. In the experiment, participants were shown masks turned inward, like concave faces. They were asked to identify features, emotions, or directions of gaze. Despite clear visual cues, most participants saw a normal, outward-facing face. Brain imaging revealed why. The fusiform face area, the part of the brain specialized in face recognition, overrides actual sensory input. The brain applies top-down processing, filling in gaps based on previous experience. This illusion is so strong that people even react emotionally to the face, despite knowing it is hollow. The hollow mask illusion has broader significance. It helps scientists understand how perception and reality can diverge, provides insight into schizophrenia, where patients may perceive faces or objects differently. It shows the brain's remarkable ability and limitation to predict the world. In short, the hollow mask illusion demonstrates our senses do not show reality directly. The brain interprets, predicts, and sometimes tricks us, making the impossible seem perfectly normal. It's a haunting reminder. What we see may not exist at all, and what doesn't exist may feel utterly real. In the 1970s, psychologist Bruce K. Alexander conducted an experiment that challenged everything we thought we knew about addiction. It was called Rat Park, and it revealed a shocking truth. Addiction isn't just about chemicals, it's about the environment. Alexander built two very different living conditions for rats. Isolated cages, small, bare, lonely, and unstimulating. Rat Park, a huge, colorful enclosure with tunnels, toys, food, water, and other rats to socialize with. Both groups of rats were given access to two water bottles, one containing plain water, one containing morphine-laced water. The results were astonishing. Rats in isolated cages drank the morphine solution almost exclusively, becoming addicted and depressed.
Rats in Rat Park, with freedom and social interaction, barely touched the drug and preferred plain water. This pattern persisted across generations. The environment, not just the drug, shaped addictive behavior. Rat Park overturned decades of assumptions. Addiction is not purely chemical or genetic. Isolation, boredom, and lack of purpose fuel substance abuse. Social bonds, stimulation, and meaningful activity protect against addiction. The implications extend far beyond rats. Human addiction treatment must consider environment and social context, not just medication. Policies that isolate or stigmatize addicts may worsen the problem. Prevention strategies should focus on community, engagement, and mental stimulation. The Rat Park experiment remains a revolutionary study proving one thing clearly: drugs don't create addicts. Loneliness and lack of purpose do.
In the 1940s, Soviet scientists in Leningrad conducted a series of experiments that pushed the human mind to its absolute limits. They wanted to understand what happens when the brain is denied sleep for extreme periods, and the results were terrifying. Volunteers, often military personnel or prisoners, were kept awake in controlled laboratory settings. They were observed continuously while researchers documented cognitive function, emotional stability, and sensory perception. After 48 to 72 hours, participants began experiencing severe mood swings, irritability, and aggression. Hallucinations, seeing walls move, objects change shape, or people appear that weren't there. By a week without sleep, the hallucinations became fully immersive and terrifying. Volunteers conversed with imaginary people. Some attacked objects or themselves, unable to distinguish reality. Thought processes deteriorated, speech became incoherent, and memory failed. Researchers discovered something chilling. Sleep deprivation overrides the brain's ability to differentiate reality from fantasy. The longer one stays awake, the more psychotic-like behaviors appear. Even healthy adults can experience temporary neurological collapse under prolonged sleep loss. These experiments were controversial, even by Soviet standards. Many volunteers suffered long-term mental health effects, including paranoia, anxiety, and chronic sleep disturbances. The Leningrad sleep hallucination trials left a stark warning. The mind cannot survive without rest. Deprive it of sleep, and the line between reality and imagination vanishes. Human perception, memory, and sanity are fragile, and the consequences of pushing them too far can be permanent.
In the 1970s, a series of experiments known as the Ganzfeld experiments attempted to answer one of humanity's oldest questions. Can the human mind communicate without words, gestures, or technology? Telepathy, the idea that thoughts can be sent directly from one person to another, was the target. The setup was simple but strange. One participant, the sender, focused on a simple image, video clip, or object. Another participant, the receiver, was placed in a sensory deprivation environment. Eyes covered with half ping-pong balls, red light shining in the room, white noise playing continuously to block out auditory cues. This setup created a uniform, featureless state, the Ganzfeld, German for whole field. The experimenter then asked the receiver to describe any thoughts, images, or impressions that came to mind. Often, the descriptions seemed random, but statistically, some receivers matched the sender's images more often than chance. In certain trials, results suggested a weak but intriguing signal of telepathy.
What made the Ganzfeld telepathy experiments fascinating was that they tried to scientifically test a phenomenon once considered purely mystical. They controlled for visual and auditory cues, attempting to isolate the mind itself. They sparked debates about consciousness, perception, and the limits of human communication. Critics were quick to challenge the results. Some effects could be explained by statistical anomalies. Others suggested experimental bias. Yet the experiments continue to inspire parapsychologists exploring non-local consciousness. The Ganzfeld telepathy experiments remind us the human mind may hold secrets we barely understand. Whether or not telepathy is real, the experiments push science toward the edge of perception, asking, how much can one mind influence another? And how far are we from unlocking the hidden power of thought itself?
Most people have heard of the trolley problem, a philosophical thought experiment asking, would you pull a lever to divert a runaway trolley, sacrificing one person to save 5? But psychologists didn't stop at theory. They wanted to see how people would act in real-life simulations. In these experiments, participants were placed in virtual reality or controlled environments that mimicked the trolley scenario. A trolley or train barreled toward 5 victims. A lever could divert the trolley to a track with 1 victim. The participants' decisions, reaction times, and physiological responses were monitored. The results were fascinating and sometimes disturbing. Most people hesitated, struggling with the moral weight of actively causing harm. Brain scans revealed activity in both the emotional centers, the amygdala, and rational decision-making areas, the prefrontal cortex. Gender, culture, and personal experiences influenced decisions. When the simulation involved personal involvement, like pushing a person instead of pulling a lever, fewer participants acted, showing how direct action triggers stronger moral resistance. The trolley problem simulations revealed morality is not purely rational. Emotion and context matter. Humans weigh personal responsibility versus utilitarian outcomes differently. Ethical decisions can be physiologically stressful, activating the same systems as real fear and threat. These studies also inform modern dilemmas: self-driving cars and their programming for accident scenarios, medical ethics like triage and resource allocation, everyday moral choices showing how our brains navigate impossible dilemmas. The real-life trolley problem simulations show that morality isn't just a thought experiment. It's a struggle, a calculation, and sometimes a gut-wrenching emotional battle. When theory meets reality, the mind reveals just how difficult doing the right thing can truly be.
One of the most mind-bending experiments in physics is the Double-Slit experiment, revealing a truth that seems more like science fiction than science. Physicists wanted to understand the behavior of particles like electrons and photons. Would they behave like tiny balls, hitting a detector in predictable ways? Or like waves, creating interference patterns like ripples on water? The experiment was simple in concept. A beam of particles is fired at a barrier with 2 thin slits. A screen behind the slits records where the particles land. Without observation, particles behave like waves, creating interference patterns as if each particle passes through both slits simultaneously. But here's the twist. When scientists place a detector to observe which slit the particle passes through, The particle suddenly behaves like a tiny solid ball, hitting the screen in two distinct clumps instead of a wave pattern. This revealed a shocking truth. The very act of observation collapses the wave function, forcing the particle to choose a path. Reality at the quantum level depends on whether someone is watching. Some interpretations suggest consciousness plays a role in the fundamental behavior of matter. Particles exist in a superposition of possibilities until measured. Reality may be less fixed and objective than classical physics suggests. The double-slit experiment has profound implications. Quantum mechanics underlies modern technology, from semiconductors to lasers. It challenges our understanding of cause, effect, and reality itself. Philosophers and scientists alike debate: does the universe exist independently of observation? This simple setup, a barrier with two slits, teaches one of the most profound lessons in science. Reality is not just observed, it is influenced by the act of observation. At the quantum level, the universe is stranger, more fluid, and more mysterious than we ever imagined.
In the 1960s, neuroscientists embarked on one of the strangest and most intriguing experiments in biology. Could memories be transferred from one organism to another? The subject of this bizarre research was the humble planarian flatworm, a tiny creature capable of regenerating its body completely after being cut in half. Researchers first trained flatworms to perform simple behaviors: swimming toward light or food in a specific pattern, avoiding mild electric shocks in certain areas. Once the flatworms had learned these behaviors, scientists did the unimaginable. They ground up the trained worms and fed them to untrained flatworms. The question: would the naive flatworms somehow inherit the memories of the trained ones? The results shocked the scientific community. Some experiments suggested that the naive flatworms learned faster, showing behaviors similar to the trained worms. This hinted that memory might not only exist in the brain, but could somehow be encoded chemically in the body. However, replication was inconsistent. Some labs couldn't reproduce the results. Skeptics argued that faster learning might be explained by subtle cues, not actual memory transfer. Despite controversy, the flatworm memory transfer experiment sparked profound questions. How are memories stored at a molecular level? Could chemical or genetic processes carry learned information? Might memory someday be engineered or transmitted biologically? This experiment reminds us of one astonishing truth: memory may not be confined to the brain. Even the simplest organisms hint that learning and experience might be embedded at the molecular level, waiting for science to unlock the secret.
In the 1990s, neuroscientist Michael Persinger conducted an experiment that blurred the lines between neuroscience and spirituality. It was called the God Helmet Study, and it aimed to explore how the brain creates mystical or religious experiences. The experiment involved a special helmet that applied weak magnetic fields to the temporal lobes of participants' brains. The temporal lobes are linked to memory, emotion, and self-perception. The goal was to subtly stimulate neural activity that might trigger spiritual sensations. Participants were asked to sit quietly, sometimes blindfolded, while wearing the helmet. The results were remarkable. Many participants reported sensing a presence in the room. Some felt an invisible entity touching or guiding them.
Others experienced out-of-body sensations, euphoria, or profound awe. A few even reported visions or hearing voices. All of this occurred without drugs, rituals, or prior expectations, just magnetic stimulation of the brain. Persinger concluded that religious and mystical experiences may arise from specific neural activity, not solely external divine forces. The sense of presence can be artificially induced in the lab. Our perception of the sacred might be deeply rooted in brain physiology. Critics argued that the effect varied widely. Not everyone experienced the phenomena. Expectation and suggestion might amplify results. Yet, the study opened a doorway to exploring the neuroscience of belief. The God Helmet study revealed a fascinating truth. Our brains are capable of creating experiences so vivid, so profound that they can feel divine. It challenges our understanding of consciousness, spirituality, and the boundary between the mind and the universe.
In 1950, mathematicians first proposed the prisoner's dilemma, a thought experiment that explores cooperation, trust, and selfishness. But psychologists wanted to see what happens in real-life scenarios. The setup: two participants are secretly offered a deal: cooperate with each other or betray. Rewards vary. If both cooperate, each gets a moderate reward. If one betrays, while the other cooperates, the betrayer gets a big reward, and the cooperator gets nothing. If both betray, both get a small penalty. Researchers turned this into repeated experiments in classrooms, workplaces, and economics labs. The results revealed surprising human behavior. Some participants cooperated consistently, prioritizing fairness and trust. Others betrayed frequently, maximizing individual gain. Patterns often changed over time. Early betrayal could provoke revenge, while consistent cooperation encouraged mutual gain. Factors like communication, reputation, and social cues drastically influenced decisions. These real-life tests of the prisoner's dilemma showed human behavior is a balance between self-interest and collective benefit. Trust and communication can override short-term incentives to betray. Social context often matters more than logic or reward calculations. The experiments also had real-world implications: economics, explaining market behavior and competition; politics, understanding negotiation and diplomacy; everyday life, why trust and betrayal shape relationships, communities, and societies. The prisoner's dilemma teaches a timeless lesson. Self-interest tempts, but cooperation sustains. In the real world, the choice between betrayal and collaboration isn't theoretical. It's decided every day in the small actions we take. In 1962, at Boston University's Marsh Chapel, a groundbreaking experiment tested a radical question. Can a psychedelic drug induce profound religious or mystical experiences? Led by psychologist Walter Pankey, the study explored the spiritual potential of LSD. The setup was simple but daring. Participants were seminarians preparing for ministry. They were given either a moderate dose of LSD or a placebo. They attended a Good Friday service with music, prayer, and ritual. Researchers monitored their mental state, spiritual experience, and sense of transcendence. The results were astonishing. Those who received LSD reported intense feelings of unity, awe, and divine presence. Participants described timelessness, ego dissolution, and profound peace. Many considered the experience among the most meaningful of their lives. Placebo participants reported far fewer mystical sensations, confirming the effect was drug-induced. The Marsh-Chapel psychedelic study revealed powerful insights. Psychedelics can profoundly alter perception and consciousness. Spiritual experiences may have neurochemical underpinnings. The mind can achieve mystical states in controlled, supportive environments. The implications went far beyond the study, influenced modern research into psychedelics for therapy, depression, and PTSD, suggested that consciousness and spirituality are deeply interconnected with brain chemistry, challenged the line between science and mysticism, proving that subjective experience can be measured and studied. The Marsh-Chapel psychedelic study reminds us, the mind is far stranger and more powerful than we often realize. With the right conditions or the right chemicals, humans can glimpse transcendence, awe, and interconnectedness, all within the boundaries of a single session.
In 2015, NASA launched one of the most extraordinary human biology experiments ever attempted. Two men, identical twins, one sent to outer space for nearly a full year. The other kept on Earth as a perfect genetic mirror. Their mission? To discover exactly how deep space living changes the human body, the mind, and even DNA itself. The twins were Scott Kelly, astronaut, sent to the International Space Station for 340 days. Mark Kelly, his identical twin, remaining on Earth as the control subject. Since identical twins shared the same DNA, any differences that appeared would be due to spaceflight alone. This was the closest science could get to a human laboratory clone experiment, except this time, it was real. Throughout the mission, NASA tracked hundreds of biological markers: gene expression, immune system reactions, telomere length, the protective caps on DNA, bone density and muscle mass, gut bacteria, cognitive performance, stress hormones, and vision and cardiovascular changes. The results were astonishing. Number 1. Scott's DNA didn't change, but the way his genes behaved did. Thousands of genes turned on or off in response to life in microgravity. This is called epigenetic change, and it showed that space literally reprogrammed his biology. Number 2. His immune system behaved strangely. Scott's immune responses became hyperactive, reacting to harmless things as if fighting infection. Space was stressing his body constantly. Number 3. His telomeres grew longer in space. This shocked scientists. Telomeres usually get shorter with age, but in orbit, they lengthened, possibly due to exercise, diet, or radiation effects. But after Scott returned to Earth, they shortened rapidly, some even beyond their original length. It raised a chilling question. Does long-term space travel accelerate aging once astronauts come home? Number 4. His eyesight changed permanently. Microgravity pushed fluids upward, flattening his eyeballs and damaging his vision, a condition known as SANS, or Spaceflight-Associated Neuroocular Syndrome. Number 5. His cognitive speed declined after returning. Tasks he once performed easily became slower and harder, showing that long missions may impair mental sharpness. Number 6. In total, about 7% of Scott's biological markers remained changed long after he returned to Earth. Even identical twins were no longer identical. Space had left a permanent signature on Scott's biology. The NASA twin study changed everything. It revealed that human bodies aren't fully adapted for long-duration missions. It uncovered deep vulnerabilities for future Mars astronauts. It proved that space travel transforms us down to the genetic and molecular level.
The twin astronaut experiment asked a question humanity has never faced before. What will happen to us when we leave Earth for good? Scott Kelly's Year in Space showed that traveling beyond our planet doesn't just change where we are, it changes who we are.
In 1973, something happened in Sweden that shocked psychologists, law enforcement, and the entire world. A 6-day bank hostage crisis twisted into one of the strangest psychological events ever recorded. It gave birth to a term now known worldwide, Stockholm Syndrome, when captives begin to identify with, trust, or even defend their captors. But behind this phenomenon lies a set of real case studies showing just how fragile and adaptable the human mind can be under extreme pressure. The Origin Case, the Normal Storg Robbery, 1973. During a botched robbery, 2 armed men held 4 hostages inside a bank vault for 131 hours. But instead of fear and hatred, something unexpected emerged. Hostages began to comfort their captors. They refused to escape even when given the chance. They defended the criminals in court. One victim even created a fund to raise money for their defense. When rescued, the hostages hugged the gunmen and criticized the police instead. The world was stunned. Patty Hearst, from heiress to revolutionary. In 1974, billionaire heiress Patty Hearst was kidnapped by a militant group. Weeks later, she appeared in surveillance footage, holding a rifle, helping her captors rob a bank. She claimed she'd been isolated, threatened, physically and psychologically broken. Experts argued she'd undergone coercive persuasion, her survival instincts reshaped by terror and dependence. Her case became one of the most controversial examples of Stockholm Syndrome ever documented. Hostage psychology – what actually happens in the brain. Key studies show that certain conditions can trigger powerful mental changes: isolation from the outside world, unpredictable violence mixed with brief moments of kindness, total dependence on captors for food, water, and survival, constant fear paired with relief, the brain's instinct to create emotional bonds as a survival strategy. These emotional ties are not irrational, they are the mind's desperate attempt to regain control in an uncontrollable situation. Why Stockholm Syndrome works. Experts believe the brain enters a paradoxical state where hostility requires energy the captive doesn't have. Cooperation increases chances of survival. Small acts of kindness from captors become psychological lifelines. The captor's goals start to feel aligned with the captive's own needs. It's not loyalty, it's not affection, it's survival reprogramming. Modern implications. Stockholm Syndrome appears in hostage situations, kidnapping victims, abusive relationships, cult indoctrination, human trafficking survivors. The real case studies show how dangerously flexible the human mind can be when cornered by fear, isolation, and total control. The Stockholm Syndrome phenomenon forces us to confront one chilling truth. The brain will do anything to survive, even if it means rewriting reality itself. It is a reminder that under extreme pressure, the line between loyalty and fear, between choice and coercion, can vanish without a trace.
Imagine this. You force a smile while looking at a funny cartoon. Almost immediately, something strange happens. Your brain starts to actually feel happier. This is the surprising result of the facial feedback hypothesis, first tested in a series of famous psychology experiments. The classic experiment. In one version, participants were asked to hold a pen in their mouth in a way that mimicked a smile, hold a pen in a way that mimicked a frown, then watch a series of cartoons or funny videos.
The results were astonishing. Those smiling rated the cartoons as significantly funnier. Those frowning rated the same cartoons as less funny. Even subtle facial movements were enough to alter emotional perception. What this tells us about emotions? The experiment revealed that emotions are not only generated in the brain. The body feeds back into the brain, shaping feelings. Simply changing facial expressions can influence mood, stress, and even decision-making. In other words, your face isn't just showing your emotions, it helps create them. Broader implications. This discovery influenced therapeutic techniques for depression, using intentional facial expressions to lift mood. Studies on mind-body connection, showing posture, gestures, and movement affect feelings. And marketing and social psychology, exploring how smiling affects persuasion and interaction. The facial feedback smile experiment shows something deceptively simple. Your body can trick your mind or guide it. Happiness isn't just a thought, it's a combination of brain, nerves, muscles, and a little bit of voluntary effort. So next time you feel down, try this. Smile. Your brain may just follow your face.
Imagine this. You're watching a video of people passing basketballs. Your task is simple. Count the number of passes. Now, while you're focused, something bizarre happens. A person in a full gorilla costume walks right through the scene, pauses, thumps their chest, and then leaves. Most viewers don't notice it at all. This phenomenon was revealed in the famous invisible gorilla experiment by psychologists Christopher Chabris and Daniel Simons. Participants focused on counting passes between team members. Despite the gorilla being obvious, about half of the people missed it entirely. This demonstrated a cognitive effect known as inattentional blindness. What this teaches us about attention? The invisible gorilla experiment shows that our minds filter reality, focusing only on what seems important. Even obvious events can disappear from awareness if we are concentrating elsewhere. Perception is selective, not absolute. In other words, just because you see doesn't mean you actually perceive. Broader implications. Driving accidents. People can miss pedestrians while focusing on traffic signals. Eyewitness testimony. Witnesses can confidently describe events they didn't actually notice. Daily life. Multitasking and distractions can make you blind to the unexpected. The invisible gorilla experiment delivers a startling message. Your attention is a spotlight. It highlights some things and leaves the rest in darkness. Even when something obvious walks right in front of you, your brain may never consciously see it.
In the 1960s, ethologist John B. Calhoun conducted one of the most famous and haunting experiments on behavior, society, and overpopulation. It was called the Mouse Utopia Experiment, and its lessons were terrifyingly clear. Calhoun built a perfect world for mice. Unlimited food and water, no predators, comfortable housing, climate-controlled conditions. This was supposed to be a paradise, a utopia where mice could thrive without limits. Phase 1, growth. The population exploded. Mice bred at maximum rates. Life seemed idyllic. At first, everything seemed perfect. Phase 2, social breakdown. As population density increased, social behavior deteriorated. Males became hyper-aggressive or withdrawn. Females abandoned maternal care. Courtship, mating, and parenting behaviors collapsed. Even though there was plenty of food, the social system failed. Phase 3, the behavioral sink. Overpopulation led to chaotic violence, self-isolation, and sterility.
Some mice became passive, withdrawing completely from social interaction. Reproduction slowed and eventually stopped. Within a few years, the colony collapsed entirely, despite perfect physical conditions. What this reveals about society. The mouse utopia experiment isn't just about mice. Abundance does not guarantee well-being. Overcrowding can trigger psychological collapse. Social structures are as vital as material resources. Mental health and social bonds are crucial for survival. Calhoun himself saw the experiment as a warning to humanity. The end of the universe for these mice came not from lack of food, but from the collapse of social life. The mouse utopia experiment shows that even in paradise, society can crumble. Too many individuals, too little social cohesion, and even abundance can lead to collapse. It's a chilling lesson about human behavior, social structures, and the limits of thriving under extreme density.
In 2010, biologist Craig Venter and his team achieved one of the most ambitious experiments in human history. They built a synthetic life form from raw DNA and inserted it into a cell. This wasn't just science fiction. It was life created in a laboratory with instructions written by humans. The experiment. Venter's team sequenced the genome of a simple bacterium, Mycoplasma mycoides. They chemically synthesized the entire genome, base by base, over 1 million DNA letters. The synthetic genome was inserted into a bacterial cell whose original DNA had been removed. The cell booted up and began to replicate, controlled entirely by the synthetic DNA. The team called it Synthia, the first organism to have a fully synthetic genome. Why it was revolutionary? It demonstrated that life can be designed and programmed like software. The synthetic cell could copy itself, grow, and function like a natural bacterium. It proved that DNA is the instruction manual for life, and that life can be engineered from scratch. Implications. The synthetic life experiment opened a Pandora's box of possibilities. Medicine. Custom bacteria for drug production or disease treatment. Energy. Bacteria engineered to produce biofuels or clean pollutants. Ethics. Raises questions about playing God, controlling life, and biosecurity. Philosophy. Challenges what it means to be alive, natural, or artificial. The takeaway. Craig Venter's experiment was a landmark in science. It showed that humans can not only read life's code, but write it. It forces us to confront the boundary between natural evolution and synthetic creation, and asks a question no one can ignore. If we can make life, should we? And how far will we go?
In the deep oceans, a tiny creature holds one of the most extraordinary secrets in biology. The jellyfish Turritopsis dohrnii, nicknamed the immortal jellyfish, may have found a way to cheat death itself. The discovery. Scientists observed that when injured, sick, or old, these jellyfish don't die. Instead, they revert their cells to an earlier developmental stage, transforming from adult back to polyp. Essentially, they start life over again, creating the possibility of biological immortality. This process is called transdifferentiation, where one type of cell becomes another. Laboratory studies. Researchers in marine biology labs began to study the jellyfish's cellular machinery, tracking how cells reverse their aging process, understanding the genetic switches that trigger rejuvenation, observing the transformation from mature medusa to polyp under controlled stress conditions. The results were stunning. The jellyfish can repeat this cycle indefinitely, potentially avoiding death from aging. They remain susceptible only to predation or disease, not natural senescence. Implications for science and medicine. Unlocking the mechanisms of cellular rejuvenation could one day inform human anti-aging research, may provide insights into regenerative medicine, tissue repair, and longevity. Raises philosophical and ethical questions. Could humans ever reverse aging on a cellular level? The takeaway. The immortal jellyfish teaches us that aging is not an inevitable law of life. It can, under the right conditions, be reversed. Nature has already found a loophole in mortality, showing that life's limits are not fixed and that the boundary between life and death is more fluid than we ever imagined.
In 2008, the Large Hadron Collider, or LHC, the world's most powerful particle accelerator, powered up for the first time. It was designed to smash protons together at near-light speeds, unlocking the secrets of the universe. But some scientists and the public feared the unimaginable. Could it create a microscopic black hole capable of swallowing the Earth? The fear experiment. While the LHC wasn't an experiment in the traditional sense, the public reaction became a massive psychological experiment on risk perception and fear. Theoretical physicists calculated that tiny black holes could form, but they would evaporate instantly due to Hawking radiation. News headlines, documentaries, and internet debates created widespread anxiety. Scientists were monitored for stress, and public engagement became a natural experiment in fear management. Lessons from the LHC anxiety. Human fear often outweighs scientific reasoning. Even extremely low-probability events triggered massive public panic. Lawsuits were filed claiming the LHC could destroy the planet. Communication is critical. Physicists had to translate complex particle physics into terms the public could understand. Misunderstandings and sensationalism amplified perceived danger. Risk perception versus reality. The LHC shows that people evaluate threats not by statistics, but by how imaginable and catastrophic they seem. A tiny, harmless black hole became a symbol of existential risk. Scientific outcome. The LHC successfully launched experiments discovering the Higgs boson in 2012. No black holes, no global disasters. Humanity learned that fear can spread faster than facts, even when the physics is solid. The LHC black hole fear experiment reminds us of one universal truth. The mind can create threats more vividly than reality itself. Sometimes the greatest danger isn't in the universe, it's in our perception of it.